Hades Hive 941.M41. Yarrick is already old when the war starts. He was scheduled to retire on the day Ghazghkull's fleet broke through the outer orbital defenses. Instead, he's in the streets of a crumbling hive, in single combat with Warboss Ugulhard, one of Ghazghkull's most prominent lieutenants, leading the mass assault on the hive's final defensive perimeter. The fight is brief. Ugulhard is enormous, armored, swinging a Power Klaw the size of a man's torso. He severs Yarrick's right arm at the elbow in a single swipe. In most 40K engagements, that ends the officer. Yarrick decapitates Ugulhard with his chainsword. He pulls the claw from the corpse with his remaining hand. He holds it above his head for both armies to see. A human, one-armed, holding a dead Ork warboss's weapon over his head in the middle of an Ork assault. The Orks break. The Imperial defenders surge forward. The assault on Hades' Hive is routed. Only after that, after the battle has shifted, after the moment has passed, does the Imperial Guard Codex record that Yarrick allowed himself the luxury of passing out. He doesn't die. He recovers. He's still on Armageddon 6 months later when Ghazghkull enters the fight personally. The Hive falls. During the final evacuation, Yarrick takes a near-fatal wound in direct combat with the Ork warlord himself and hovers near death through the final stages of the withdrawal. Blood Angels arrive. The Second War ends. Yarrick recovers. Nearly 10 years later, he pursues Ghazghkull to the world of Golgotha, across a cat-and-mouse hunt spanning multiple star systems. He believes he finally has his enemy cornered. For a moment, the battle goes his way. Then, a second Ork force hits from behind. A space hulk emerges from behind the planet's moon to drive off the Imperial Navy. Yarrick's armored company is destroyed around him. The Chains of Golgotha novella describes the extermination as total, and he wakes in chains above a waste pit inside the Hulk, stripped of both bionics. No claw, no bale eye. Ghazghkull is watching when consciousness returns. He waits for Yarrick's eyes to focus, then drops him into the rubbish below. The pit holds squigs, refuse, the detritus of a large warship. Yarrick spends days hunting squigs with his bare hands in the dark, using their massive quills as improvised handholds to build a ladder against the waste chute wall, and climbs back out. Ghazghkull is waiting at the top. Yarrick organizes the human slave labor gangs into a revolt. It fails. He makes it to the Hulk's bridge, dispatches the mech boys manning the stations, activates every ship system at once in the hope of making the Hulk tear itself apart, watches a massive explosion erupt along the hull as the shock wave races toward his position, and commends his soul to the Emperor. Days later, he wakes again. His bionics have been returned to him while he slept. Hundreds of Orks are cheering. Ghazghkull hands him a shuttle, looks him in the eye, and states the reason the Lexicanum records. Good enemies are hard to find. Yarrick is escorted to the launch bay while hundreds of Orks part to let him through, still cheering, and he departs Golgotha on an Ork-provided transport to warn the Imperium of what's coming. Then, the Third War. M41.998, 57 years to the day after the Second, which is either astronomical coincidence or a deliberate Ork cultural decision about timing. More than 2,000 starships, 12 space hulks. A ground force the official order of battle eventually estimates at over 4 million greenskins across the planet's surface. Yarrick comes out of retirement. He takes supreme command by unanimous vote. He holds the line through a grinding attrition campaign that transforms Armageddon into a permanent war zone with no resolution and no end. He chases Ghazghkull again afterward. The Black Templars join the hunt. They corner the kill Rekka at the Battle of the Haunted Gulf.
Ghazghkull escapes into the warp and begins the Great Waaagh. Yarrick keeps following. He eventually tracks Ghazghkull to the world of Icaria, where the warlord has been running exotic machinery that's buckling the planet itself from the inside. Yarrick lands a strike force directly on his position. They fight. Yarrick wounds him. Then Ghazghkull lifts the Commissar off the ground in his Power Klaw, headbutts him into unconsciousness, and holds the clear path to the final kill that he has been building toward for over 50 years. He grins and walks away. A wolf priest evacuates Yarrick from the dying world. As he recovers in the medical bay of the Space Wolves' strike cruiser, rumors of his death spread. The bell of lost souls on Terra tolls. He wakes up. Then, the official version. The Divisio Mortis of the Officio Praefectus circulates a formal report to Imperial war zones and Terra. Sebastian Yarrick is dead. Cause of death not stated. The bell of lost souls rings in the Imperial Palace, not from rumor, but from official military record. His obituary runs in the 8th edition Codex Astra Militarum. Official Warhammer community sources hint strongly at a skull with a bionic eye strung around the demon Primarch Angron's neck, suggesting death by World Eater, possibly Angron himself. Then the Fourth War for Armageddon begins, and Games Workshop announces his return. Their exact phrasing: "We saw how he cheated death. Dismembered, captured and dropped into a pit, nearly killed in evacuation, knocked unconscious on a collapsing world, officially eulogized on Terra by the military bureaucracy. Every time he comes back. There's a reason. It has nothing to do with divine blessing, genetic mutation, or the intervention of the ruinous powers. The answer is green and loud, and has been running without anyone directing it for 100 years. To understand what happened to Yarrick, you need to understand the Waaagh field as something more than a battle cry. Every orc is innately psychic, not in the usable, controllable sense. Most orcs have no more awareness of their psychic potential than a generator has of the current it's producing. The emission is constant and unconscious. Weird boys are the exception. They act as psychic sponges, absorbing and channeling the ambient energy that every other orc radiates without knowing it. When enough orcs gather in one place and grow excited, particularly in battle, the collective field they generate, what the lore calls the Waaagh field, grows potent enough to affect the physical world. The weird boy entry in the lore is precise on the scaling. The more orcs, the greater the psychic power generated. The most famous demonstration is the red vehicles principle. The 4th edition Orc Codex states it without hedging. Orcs believe a vehicle painted red will outstrip one that isn't, and they are correct. The vehicles are measurably faster. The orcs didn't engineer a faster vehicle and then paint it red to celebrate. They believe the paint causes the speed, and the field runs that belief forward into physical reality. A 7th edition supplement pushes the principle further, describing certain orc repair tools and noting that, in typically orky fashion, the sheer belief that these tools can work wonders often seems to mean they do just that. Now, there's genuine debate about how broadly this applies. The original 3rd edition source framing the belief makes it true principle is an in-universe report from an imperial scientist, the Adeptus Mechanicus, an institution that processes all unknown technology through theological frameworks and regarded with institutional suspicion anything that suggested alien engineering might be sophisticated. The report is, contextually, a product of its narrator.
Ork technology also demonstrably functions without psychic assistance. Yarrick uses an Ork Power Klaw. Cain has driven Ork vehicles and fired their weapons. The mean version of the principle. Orks believe it, it's true. Full stop. Is an overgeneralization. The measured version holds. The Waaagh field functions as probability modification. It keeps ramshackle machines running past their structural limits. It bends outcomes toward what Ork belief has already established as true. And it scales. Small warband, background noise. Hundreds of thousands of excited Orks, measurable effect. Millions across a single world in sustained, multi-year campaigns, something that begins to look less like noise and more like a sustained psychic climate. That distinction matters enormously for Armageddon specifically. By the Third War in M41.998, the Orks fighting at Armageddon are operating inside the largest Waaagh in 8,000 years. The De Great Waaagh Lexicanum entry documents the scale. The largest Ork campaign encountered since the War of the Beast in M32. The Third War's order of battle from Codex. Armageddon puts more than 4 million greenskins on the planet's surface, conservatively excluding feral tribes. Over 2,000 starships in the invasion fleet, 12 space hulks, a psychic field generated by millions of Orks who have been mythologizing one specific human figure for more than 50 years. 4 million Orks on one world, all of them carrying a specific story about an unkillable old man. The Orks learned about Yarrick quickly. After the Ugulhard fight, after the routing of the assault on Hades' Hive, word moved through the Ork ranks the way Ork news moves, loud and without structure. The in-universe record describes it directly. News of the incident spread like wildfire among the Orks, and wherever Yarrick fought afterward, the greenskins fled in terror. They gave him Ork names. Old Bale Eye, One Eye Yarrick. He existed in the Ork world of reference as the human who mattered, the specific individual designated by the Ork collective as extraordinary before the Second War was even finished. The Bale Eye came next, and this is the moment where the feedback loop becomes explicit enough to serve as canonical evidence for the mechanism. The Orks developed a superstition. Yarrick could kill with a glance. His battlefield reputation, the story of Ugulhard, the severed arm held aloft. Ork psychology processed all of this through the filter of Ork belief and produced a specific claim. This human's eyes were lethal. Yarrick heard about it. He studied Ork culture more deeply than any other living human, having learned the language from a captured raider in his youth and spent decades developing expertise in Ork psychology. He understood precisely what Ork superstition does once it attaches to a subject, and when he heard the rumor, he had his missing eye replaced with a bionic implant that fires a short-range laser beam. The myth was already running. He built the myth into his body and made it real. The Lexicanum's Yarrick entry is exact. After hearing rumors that he could kill with a glance, he had the Bale Eye implanted specifically to play on the Ork superstition. He didn't receive the laser eye because it was the tactically optimal prosthetic. He received it because the Orks already believed he had one, and a human who understands Ork psychology the way Yarrick does knows that confirming an Ork belief is a fundamentally different act from initiating one. The field had already decided he had a death gaze. He built the death gaze to match. The Power Klaw operates on the same principle. Ugulhard uses it to take Yarrick's arm. Yarrick kills Ugulhard and takes it back. From an Ork frame of reference, the logic is clear. The strongest warrior takes trophies from those he defeats, and only the genuinely strong can wield them. An orc weapon in a human's hands carries a specific meaning in orc cultural grammar. It means the human earned it.
The field treats the claw as legitimate in Yarrick's grip because the collective orc understanding has already decided that a human who took it in single combat from a war boss can carry it. The belief precedes the use. The use confirms the belief. The cycle turns. Every subsequent survival reinforces the legend. Every time the legend grows, more orcs believe. Every time more orcs believe, the field density increases. Yarrick is described in the lore as one of the few figures who understands orc mentality deeply enough to have deliberately modified his body to fit orc superstition. But the modifications just accelerate a process that would run without them. He feeds the machine runs itself. Ghazghkull, across all 3 Armageddon campaigns and every engagement between them, keeps not finishing it. At Golgotha, after the most complete military defeat of Yarrick's career, his forces destroyed, himself captured, stripped, dropped in a pit, Ghazghkull provides him a shuttle. The formal reason recorded is rivalry, the desire to preserve a worthwhile enemy. That's a coherent individual motive. But Ghazghkull is also the prophet of the Waaagh, a figure whose entire authority rests on his mythologized status as the mightiest orc alive. A warlord who understands on some deep level how orc belief and orc power interact. Yarrick alive and opposed to him across another campaign is a source of Waaagh energy. Yarrick dead on Golgotha produces nothing. The practical reason and the field-level reason point to the same outcome. 3 categories need ruling out before the mechanism can be named. A perpetual in 40K is a specific mutant branch of the human species, genetically distinct, capable of physical regeneration from death, a documented and granular category in the Horus Heresy novel series. John Grammaticus is a perpetual. The category is tracked carefully in those novels, with specific known and suspected members. Yarrick's name appears in none of that literature. He doesn't regenerate. After each serious injury, he receives augmetic replacements, bionics, the new cybernetic armature after Icaria. His body accumulates hardware. It doesn't heal supernaturally. Perpetual is the wrong category, and the research on the category is specific enough that the absence is meaningful. An imperial saint, Celestine being the primary living canonical example, returns from death through the Emperor's direct psychic investment via the Astronomicon and the faith network of the Imperium. Warhammer community has floated this theory for Yarrick, and it's structurally defensible. The survival pattern resembles a living saint's. But the living saint mechanism doesn't explain why the pattern concentrates specifically around orc contact. An Emperor-backed blessing would apply broadly across a hero's career. Yarrick's survival anomalies cluster at Armageddon and in direct orc engagements. The mechanism would need to be general to fit the saint model. The pattern here isn't general. The chaos angle runs in the wrong direction. If the skull around Angron's neck is Yarrick's, if chaos killed him in the era Indomitus, that's the end of the story, not the mechanism of survival across the preceding decades. Whatever Angron may have done happened after 3 Armageddon campaigns had already built the pattern. Chaos involvement in the reported death is compatible with the thesis rather than contradicting it. The one time Yarrick appears to have died canonically was against a chaos entity, not against orcs. The orc field sustained him through orc contact. Angron is something outside that field's coverage. The mechanism that explains the specific pattern of the specific career is this: concentrated collective orc belief sustained across a psychically saturated environment over a long duration, bending physical reality in the direction of what millions of orcs have already decided is true.
Yarrick is unkillable because the Orks believe he is, in sufficient concentration, at sufficient duration, on the world that served as the central theater of the largest Waaagh in 8,000 years. That belief runs a process with a named outcome. Ork-imposed mortal apotheosis. Involuntary elevation of a non-Ork combatant to functionally protected status, driven by concentrated collective Ork belief in a psychically saturated environment. The subject does not consent. The Orks don't intend it. The field runs the mechanism without any individual directing it. Chaos apotheosis requires devotion, worship, active service to a patron who demands it in return. The Ork version requires nothing from the subject except continued presence in front of enough believers. Yarrick is case 1. The problem is that case 2 appears to already be underway, and has been for decades. Ciaphas Cain is over 200 years old by the time of the 13th Black Crusade. Sandy Mitchell's series, which began in 2003 and runs across 9 novels plus multiple short stories and novellas, documents those 2 centuries in memoirs Cain presents as personal and unofficial, edited by Inquisitor Amberly Vale of the Ordo Xenos for an audience with the appropriate security clearance. The defining note of those memoirs is Cain's insistence that he has survived everything through luck, panic, and an unusually capable aide named Jurgen. The pattern suggests something more systematic. Death or glory is set on Perlia. Cain's troop transport is ambushed through the warp during a deployment to reinforce a planet already under full Ork invasion. He and Jurgen bail out in an escape pod and crash land thousands of miles behind Ork lines with the entire invasion force between them and safety. What follows across the novel is Cain improvising his way through occupied territory, leading a growing column of refugees and planetary defense survivors, attacking Ork supply lines, rallying demoralized PDF units, operating as an unsupported 2-man element inside a full Waaagh. He comes out the other side having inadvertently become the operational spine of the entire counteroffensive. After the engagement, the military bureaucracy attempts to process the earlier KIA classification. The resulting situation is so persistently unresolvable, Cain keeps being reported dead and keeps appearing alive, that a standing order is eventually issued. Commissar Ciaphas Cain isn't to be classified killed in action until confirmed missing for several years. The order isn't rescinded at his eventual state funeral, attended by the Imperium's senior military personnel, with full honors in front of witnesses. He remains on the active duty roster after his own burial. The Imperium's own paperwork acknowledged the pattern and stopped fighting it. That is a canonical fact, stated in a Black Library novel, and it tells you something specific. The survival anomaly is consistent enough and persistent enough across enough documented engagements that military administration formally gave up on standard accounting. The last ditch sends Cain to Nusquam Fundamentibus for a routine Ork infestation. The transport crashes onto the planet during approach, directly into the Ork force, and Cain spends the rest of the novel fighting his way through an engagement that rapidly becomes something considerably worse than the briefing suggested. He comes out. The Emperor's finest has Ork stowaways aboard the transport, the kind of encounter that happens specifically to Cain in the specific way that things happen to Cain, where the universe produces Ork contact from directions that shouldn't be possible. The bigger they are puts Cain in a novel with an Ork Gargant. A Gargant is a walking fortress, a machine that justifies a campaign to destroy on its own. Cain is still narrating afterward. The short story, The only good orc has a conclusion its title implies.
The greater good contains confirmed orc content. An adjacent short story in the same volume is titled Rotten to the Core. One community summary of a Cain novel describes its central premise as a 300-page demonstration of how avoiding an orc Waaagh could somehow be worse for your personal safety than the Waaagh itself, which is a specific kind of joke about a specific kind of survivor. That is confirmed orc engagements across at least 5 novels and multiple short stories, spanning multiple distinct worlds and multiple separate orc forces with no shared command structure. Distributed belief. Multiple orc populations across multiple campaigns, each one carrying forward a version of the same story about the commissar who doesn't die. The structural contrast with Yarrick is important. Yarrick's case concentrated inside a single psychic environment. One world, 3 campaigns over 50 years, the largest Waaagh in 8,000 years, all focused on one theater. Cain's case is diffuse. The belief pressure is distributed across worlds, diluted across separate orc forces that don't share a unified Waaagh field. The legend builds more slowly. There's no single event equivalent to the Ugulhard fight, no single moment where the orc collective updated its understanding of what Cain was. What there is, a standing order from the Imperium's own military bureaucracy acknowledging that standard mortality accounting doesn't apply to Ciaphas Cain. An Inquisitor editor who adds footnotes throughout his memoirs with a persistent dry awareness that his survival pattern defies actuarial prediction. A commissar who is over 200 years old and still in the field, still producing orc engagement reports, still generating legend among the orc forces he encounters. The prior video on this channel, The Orcs Are Making Cain Immortal Too, started from an observation rather than a thesis. 3 separate people, independently, in the comments of the Ordo Illuminati Yarrick video, typed the same name without being prompted by each other or by the video. No coordination. 3 viewers watching an argument about Yarrick and independently arriving at Cain as the logical extension. The community was running the theory in fragments. The framework needed naming. The uncertainty layers are worth stating in order. Waaagh field mechanics as a reality-bending force is established lore, documented in official codex material and debated in its extent, but not in its existence. The Yarrick application, that this mechanism explains his survival pattern across the Armageddon campaigns, is theory, grounded in canonical behavioral evidence and the specific circumstances of the engagements documented above. The Cain extension is this channel's hypothesis, theoretical extrapolation from the named framework, and not established lore. All 3 layers are simultaneously true. The confidence decreases as you move outward from the first. There's a comment from the Ordo Illuminati Yarrick video that reportedly drew significant engagement, and it deserves its moment here not as evidence, but as the logical endpoint of the argument run to its natural conclusion. The premise. Yarrick puts on his pants in the morning and notices they're a little short. He visits the tailor for a new pair. The tailor asks with some concern if he's been feeling well, because he looks a little green. And then it hits the man who has spent 60 years studying orc psychology. The orcs believe the strongest human is also the biggest human. They've been believing that about him for decades. And the Waaagh field, which makes red vehicles measurably faster and keeps ramshackle engines running past their rated tolerances, has been doing what the Waaagh field does. He has been getting taller. This is a joke. It earns its laugh. Then the laugh fades. Because if the mechanism is real, if sustained, concentrated orc belief in a psychically saturated environment
bends physical reality in the direction of orc expectation. There's no principled boundary where the effect stops at probability manipulation and can't eventually reach the biology of the subject. Orc warbosses grow physically larger as orcs believe in their power. That is documented in the Ghazghkull lore across multiple codex editions. Ghazghkull is described in the lore as vastly larger than any physical representation suggests, because enough orcs believe the claim, and the field has been carrying that belief for decades. The Waaagh field demonstrably affects orc biology. The extrapolation to a human the field has been treating as something above ordinary human status for the better part of a century is speculative. It isn't structurally different from claims the lore already makes about what the field does. The Holy Trinity comment, Gork, Mork, and York, drew its response because it names the implied endpoint with more accuracy than it has any right to. Yarrick, saint of the Orks, not a saint of the Imperium, not elevated by prayer and the Astronomicon and the faith of billions of humans, elevated by 4 million green believers who decided across 50 years of continuous warfare that this specific old man was something outside the ordinary boundaries of what humans were allowed to be. He didn't volunteer. He doesn't know. The field runs the process whether the subject participates or not. Someone in that comment section wrote something that closes this case more cleanly than any lore analysis manages. The funny thing about videos like this is that they influence the Warhammer community, who then influence the writers, who then write the canon. The pathway is real. Community theory shapes lore discourse. Lore discourse reaches the writers. The writers produce sourcebooks and campaign guides and novel series. Things that started as comment section arguments have become established canon entries. The theory to canon pipeline has a documented history across multiple editions. Games Workshop's framing for the return of Yarrick, "We saw how he cheated death," isn't the language of miraculous resurrection. It's the language of a man who has been surviving by mechanisms that don't follow the ordinary rules, returning from circumstances that should have been final, because something in the structure of the universe around him has shifted in ways that official imperial theology doesn't fully account for. The term coined here is orc-imposed mortal apotheosis. The Yarrick case is theory, named from canonical behavioral evidence. The Cain extension is this channel's hypothesis. The timestamp on this video is the record. If Sandy Mitchell's next Cain novel drops a footnote from Amberley Vale about his anomalous survival statistics, specifically in orc engagements, this channel will notice. If a future Black Library supplement formally explores what the Waaagh field does to non-orc adversaries over long periods of sustained contact, this channel will notice. And if the next official Yarrick artwork shows him a fraction taller than the last, a slightly different complexion, pants that don't quite reach the ankle, this channel will have called it first. Drop your favorite Yarrick or Cain survival moment below. The most liked comment becomes the cold open of the next video. Subscribe if you want to be there when it does.